First thing I need you to do is you're going to sit up nice and tall. You're going to get your brains going. Sit as tall as you can. Now I'm going to have you do something called bioenergetic breathing. You're going to go 2 minutes on this. Well, we'll get to the states later. When you guys are doing this, it's going to be mouth breathing, and it's continuous breath, meaning you're not, it's, and it should be coming from the belly. So just notice how your brain feels right now, your state feels right now. After 2 minutes of this, it's only going to be 2 minutes, just notice how you feel. So a continuous breath, it's going to be in through the mouth, out through the mouth. Belly should expand each time you inhale. Everybody got it? Sit nice and tall. Go ahead and begin. 2 minutes. I should be hearing you guys breathe if you're doing it right. Big breath in, big breath out. Big breath in, big breath out. Just one continuous breath. Get as much air in you as you can. Get 30 seconds in. Make sure you do it through the mouth. It's a different effect through the mouth. Got 1 minute left. Seconds. And relax. So if you get enough oxygen in, you should notice your brain feels different. Now you could do that 5-10 minutes. I've done it as long as an hour. But you can really change the state of your brain and your body through breathing. So that is called bioenergetic breathing. Your brain should be fully locked in now. You should feel pretty good. Tonight, what we're going to be going over, first of all, before I go over the agenda, we got Steve and Aaron, two of the best at what they do, right? Steve's got 11 physical therapy clinics around the state. Aaron runs the Clinton office here. We got Paul back there. Coach Paul is one of the top high school strength coaches in the country. You know, he's one of our coaches at Newell Strength. And then I just like to study a lot of weird stuff. So we're going to give you everything we got. Shoulders, elbows, wrists. It's going to be about 45 to 70 minutes, depending on how many questions you guys have. At the end, we will go over questions to keep the flow going. So if you have questions, just try to remember them or jot them down. Steve and Aaron are going to begin with structural, mechanical, and soft tissue. Paul is going to go over some really cool stuff, a protocol he has with move well, move strong, and move fast. I'm going to be going over training while injured, little grip work, and fasting. And I'll tie that into how that can help you heal. All right, so Steve and Aaron are going to get it going. There you go,
buddy. Thanks, Kyle. I just want to thank Steve Bork for, Steve, where's Steve? There he is. Steve for hosting tonight. Steve's been a friend for probably 12, 13 years. Am I allowed to say how we met?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if you know if you train here at Courtside. Steve hurt his back like probably a decade ago, and he was hobbling around this place for a while. Brian Blair is one of our therapists over in Flemington. Put Steve back together, and he was able to get through, and he still teaches, and he never needed surgery. So Steve's one of our greatest success stories. So I just want to thank him for letting us do this tonight. Also, Kyle, Paul, Alyssa, the gang from Newell Strength. Speak louder. I'm sorry. I apologize. The crew here from Newell Strength, I personally go to the gym in Flemington. They're incredibly knowledgeable. It's a great atmosphere. It's a great environment. Aaron and I are with ProCare Rehabilitation, physical therapy practice, and we have one in Flemington, one in Clinton. We also, like Kyle said, we have several others, Bridgewater and also throughout the state. Today we wanted to talk about, we figured, hey, we're at the tennis center. Let's talk about upper extremity injuries, and let's talk about, in general, orthopedics and how, hopefully what we teach you today is you take any orthopedic injury, and I'd like to break it down in a real simple way to look at, how it is treated. You could go from New Jersey to California and stop at every orthopedic office, and I want you to think a certain way as far as, what can my problem be? Not necessarily, is it tendonitis? Is it a bone spur? Is it a diagnosis? I want to talk more in concepts tonight. So let's start there. So there's 3 baskets. You take any orthopedic problem in your body. It could be your shoulder, your knee, your spine, anywhere. You have 3 baskets that you could put it in. The first problem is a structural problem. A classic structural problem would be a broken bone, right? The bone broke. The structure is bad. You need to go in a cast. Another structural problem might be a full tear, something that completely rips that needs surgery. Another one could be a bone spur, something that just grew and is now in the way and needs to be removed. So the first basket that, whenever you're dealing with any orthopedic problem, the first basket is structure. The second basket is what I like to call tissue/inflammatory. And so a lot of people could relate to this one. Tendonitis, a sprain, a muscle pull, a grind strain, a hamstring tear. We know about inflammation and tissue injuries very well. You take some Advil, you put some ice on it, your typical kind of sports injury tends to fall in this category. The third basket, I think, is the most unique basket. It's the basket that most people don't really understand, but they kind of do, but they never really were explained. And I got to be honest, we've come across like young physicians that don't even know what basket number 3 is. And I know that sounds crazy. And basket number 3 is a mechanical problem. Mechanical problem is when something in your body isn't working right. And so when something isn't working right, you develop a problem that needs to be corrected. The question is, how do you treat that problem? And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about each of these baskets, and then let's get quickly into the upper extremity and start relating some injuries into them. So I don't want to talk too much about structural. It's pretty obvious, right? You break a bone, bone spur, severe arthritis. A lot of people think arthritis is a structural problem. More often than not, arthritis isn't what you think it is. Arthritis is an inflammation in the joint. It doesn't mean the joint's worn out to the bone. So there's a lot of people that have bouts of inflammation in the joint, and you have arthritis, but then that goes away. Well, the joint didn't recover, it didn't regenerate, so it's just basically, it's a term for inflammation in the joint. But severe degeneration is a structural problem. That's why you get your knees and hip replacements. So let's jump over to tissue inflammatory. Tissue inflammatory, if you're looking at it in the traditional sense, is if you overload or overuse a muscle or a tendon or a ligament, if you stress it to the point where it may have some micro tearing, gets agitated, aggravated, not a complete tear, partial tear, micro tear, and inflamed. And so, like I said, overuse and overload. If you paint the ceiling in your basement, the next day you can't lift your arm, that it's very likely that that's like an overuse. And sometimes it's as simple as that. You take a few Advil and you feel better, inflammation goes down. If it doesn't go down, it may take 7 to 10 days. Some people will get a cortisone shot and the inflammation goes away, or the doctor will prescribe prednisone. It's pretty straightforward. So what I'm talking about here are the baskets, and I'm being very straightforward with each one. Now, the interesting part about the third category is this is where it gets a little confusing. How many times have you said to yourself or thought to yourself, hey, every time I take the Advil, I feel good, but then I stop taking it and the pain comes back again? Or, do I really want to take that Advil? Isn't it just going to mask the symptoms? Or, yeah, I went and got a shot. It worked. It lasted for like 2 weeks, and then the problem came back again. And so a lot of people start to realize that these categories aren't as crispy clean as you think they are. Sometimes something's causing the inflammation. When something isn't working right in your body, it could cause a tendon or tissue inflammation. You could throw a bucket of water on the fire, but at the end of the day, if there's something wrong, and the fire reignites. And so that's what a mechanical problem is. And I'm going to go through the shoulder, the elbow. We'll talk a little about the spine. But, essentially, I was doing a talk about 12 years ago to a bunch of residents at Hunter Medical Center. And this story literally just popped into my head. And they were listening to me, and they're like, yeah, it's true. We order prednisone, we order meds, they come back 30 days later, and they run the prescription, and it comes back again. And it's like, it doesn't feel right to just keep prescribing this anti-inflammatory. Like, what's going on? What's wrong? And so I started talking about the mechanical, and the head resident's like, I have a shoulder problem. I've had it for 6 months now. The NSAIDs aren't working. I was like, push some tables together. So we literally laid him on his back, and we started moving his shoulder around, tossing his shoulder around, doing some like mobilizations to his shoulder to try and make his shoulder work a little better. And when he got up, well, he raised his arm over his head. He's like, oh my God, like, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, I didn't give you an anti-inflammatory, but you hurt. We laid you down. We did a few things to your shoulder, and now you raised your arm and it doesn't hurt. And he looks at me, he's like, what's going on? And so that's a mechanical problem, and basically his shoulder wasn't working right. He was creating a lot of friction in the tendon, and he had tendonitis. He was diagnosing himself with tendonitis. The anti-inflammatories, he was treating it like this, but the problem really wasn't this. That was the symptom. The problem was mechanical. I gave another example of this because it's a bit of a strange concept. I don't know if everyone's quite getting it yet, but I gave it in the last talk I did. I gave another story of like my childhood where my brothers and I were wrestling in the hallway, and we slammed into a door, and we were like, oh shoot, we broke the door, and like we ran into the other room. My dad came home yelling at us, and he's like, he went to shut the door, and he's like, the door doesn't shut right now, and the hinge twisted, and so the door wasn't shutting right. So he put his foot on one side of the door, and he pulled the top of the door like 10 times, and he went to shut the door, and it was worse. He put his foot on the other side of the door, he pulled the door 10 times the other direction, he shut the door latched, and he was like, stop, yelled at us, and he walked out of the house, walked downstairs. That's a classic mechanical problem. Something wasn't working right. The hinge was twisted. The mechanics weren't working. The door wasn't latching. If we didn't fix that, and we opened and closed that door for the next 2 weeks, the hinge would have heated up. Little metal filings would have fell from the hinge. We would have went and it started to squeak. We would have shot WD-40 on it, like cortisone, right? We would put some grease, and so it would never really fixed it. What really fixed it was my dad changing the hinge and the fact that it wasn't working right. And so it's interesting because you go back to structural, people come in and they're like, oh, my doctor took an x-ray. I have arthritis. And then in 2 visits, they're feeling better. And they're like, what'd you do to my knee? And they had a mechanical problem. Yeah, they took an x-ray and they have degeneration and yada, yada, yada. But was that really the cause of the problem? Or did they have a mechanical problem? And again, people come in, oh yeah, I have tendonitis. He's been giving me pills for 6 months. Again, is it caused by a mechanical problem? There's more mechanical problems in your body than you know. And they're in every joint and throughout your body. And so a good physical therapist really treats mechanical problems. We really don't treat structural problems. That's where orthopedics come in. They do surgeries, casts, slings. Inflammation, to be honest, if it's truly this category 2, you probably never get to PT because you take Advil. If it's truly only that, it usually just goes away. And but number 3 is our office is filled with number 3. And the beauty of number 3 is, what excites us the most about therapists is, we could truly make rapid change. Just the way my dad fixed that door within 10 pulls. I worked that resident, and he got up and raised his arm over his head. That's a common trait that you could have. You could be miserable one day, and the next day it feels good. It's like, what's going on? Why is it when I sleep this way, I wake up, I can't move, but then I do this, and I can move? It starts to not make sense. It's because it's mechanical. And so let's talk about the shoulder. Let's talk about the elbow real quick, and then we'll bring these other guys up here. So there's something in the shoulder called tendonitis, right? It's rotator cuff tendonitis. Impingement syndrome. That's another term you might have heard. Basically what happens when you raise your arm over your head, you have pain in your shoulder, okay? And when you raise your arm over your head, there's a lot that goes on. It's not just a ball rolling in a socket, okay? So when you first start raising your arm over your head, the first thing that happens is your ball rolls in the socket. When you get to about 80 degrees, what starts to happen is your shoulder blades start to move. And the reason why is you have the ball and you have a socket and you have space there, and all the tendons kind of attach to that ball in the socket. And you need to roll your ball in the socket and maintain that space. So as your ball goes up, if it just went up and it bumped into the top of your socket, you would basically crush the tendons in your socket. So what happens is your shoulder blade engages. And now you need this motion of the shoulder blades to fan out, to improve, to maintain that space, and your arms go over your head. So you can imagine if your shoulder blades aren't kicking out properly, your ball rolls up, hits the top of the socket. Every time you raise your arm to 90 degrees, like, I can't lift, because you're crushing the ball into the top of the socket and essentially smashing those tendons and impinging those tendons. That's a classic mechanical problem. And we treat that in therapy all the time. You could go to the doctor, get a cortisone shot. It could feel really, really good for a few days. But if you keep raising your arm up over your, and tennis players, I don't know if there's any tennis players in the group here, but a lot of people know that right around 90 degrees, they have the worst pain. And a lot of times that's from impingement syndrome, and that's a mechanical problem. Talk about the elbow is interesting, because again, we're at a tennis center. Let's talk about tennis elbow. Tennis elbow, there's two bones in the forearm, all right? And one of the bones is on the outside of your elbow, that all the tendons run right past and attach above the elbow. If that joint in your elbow isn't quite set right, like the hinge, you could develop tendonitis-like symptoms. Now this sounds very strange, like chiropractic-like, like, oh, my joints are off, but it's very subtle sometimes. We'll do taping techniques, mobilization techniques, and we constantly look for rapid change, like the door. And so we're looking to figure out in therapy, is this a hinge problem in your elbow with that joint on the outside of your elbow? Or is this truly a true tendonitis, like a tennis elbow, an inflammatory problem? And so we do certain things in therapy where we'll tape the joint and we'll have you do a provocative movement, and then we'll tape a joint and we'll have you do it again, and you're like, that feels a lot better. Well, I can't fix tendonitis that quickly. Or the other thing will happen where we do a similar type diagnosis and it doesn't make any change. The joint is stable, it's positioned correctly, the hinge has full range of motion, but you just truly have this tendonitis. If anyone here has ever been to ProCare, they've probably experienced this. In fact, I think Kate's definitely been through this. Joe D's definitely been through this. You've been through it. And so part of our magic, I think what we do is that we have that number 3 figured out. And it's so important because you need to understand number 3 in order to really sniff out 2 and 1. Like you really need to know how to sort all these problems into baskets. So again, in a shoulder, it's that shoulder blade, the tendon, the ball rolling, everything has to work right. If it doesn't, the tendon gets smashed in the socket. That's a mechanical problem. If it's just overload, overuse, and everything's working right, well, that's a number 2, a tissue inflammatory problem. It's the same thing for an elbow. You have that one little joint on the outside of the elbow. If that joint, that hinge quite isn't right, it could develop a tendonitis, but it's not really number 2, it's really number 3. And so this is what I wanted to talk today about. When we get to the wrist, again, there's a few things that happen in a wrist, but shoulders and elbows tend to be a bigger issue. What we tend to see in wrists is carpal tunnel syndrome. So I don't know if anyone here has ever had tingling in their fingers, but I will say this, carpal tunnel syndrome is essentially, it's a mechanical problem where that the nerve runs through the wrist and there's a little canal that the nerve runs through. And if that canal gets narrowed, the nerve no longer has enough room. And it really just rubs and rubs and rubs, and the friction of that is a problem. They go in there and they surgically snip it, and they create more room, and they fix carpal tunnel. We don't have great success treating carpal tunnel. I'll be very honest. I mean, we do get them better from time to time. There are some techniques that we use. But the one thing that we do notice with carpal tunnel is the majority of the people that come in with tingling in their fingers diagnosed with carpal tunnel don't really have carpal tunnel. And so, again, to try and create, an understanding of the three baskets, we'll do an assessment of their wrist, and we're like, nothing we're doing to their wrist is producing the tingling in their fingers. I'm looking to reproduce it. If I can't reproduce it, it's probably not carpal tunnel. So then you start to go up and you start to look at the neck. And so many times, and I'm going to let Erin chit-chat about the neck a little bit, but I wanted to talk today a little bit about these three categories, those two diagnoses, the shoulder, elbow, and even the carpal tunnel. But essentially, at the end of the day, everything goes back to the nervous system, all the muscles, all the joints, the way they move, the way they work, the way they contract, all has to do with the nerves coming from the neck and the upper extremity, and the lower extremity, it's the lumbar. And that, at that point, the therapist rules out structural, tissue, mechanical of the wrist. Then they go, well, what's the tingling from? Now we're up at the spine, we're dealing with the nervous system. So go ahead, Erin. How do we address that?
Yeah, so a lot of it, Steve hit the nail on the head a lot with, structural, mechanical. This is our bread and butter. This is what we do best. This is where we kind of separate ourselves from others. And a lot of it comes back to posture. We're, again, at a tennis center, so I'm sure a lot of you play, or a lot of active with lifting weights. Posture. When we get fatigued, when we get tired, it all kind of falls apart sometimes up here. Oh. Thank you. But yes, a lot of times everything kind of falls apart. I'm guilty of it as well. So nerves come from the spine. I tell my patients all the time, nerves come from the spine and make muscles work. I make the joke, muscles are kind of stupid sometimes. They only do what nerves tell them. So if nerves not getting good input, if with repetition, with that overuse, with tennis or with whatever sport you're playing, if it's all one way, one direction, overuse, that ball in the socket Steve was talking about, if it's all that one way and if there's an imbalance in the muscle, if there's pressure coming from the posture, then it's going to start to irritate a nerve. Nerves can, from the neck, like Steve had mentioned, come all the way down the arm and hand. A lot of times I'll have patients that say they have carpal tunnel bilaterally. And if it's truly just a carpal tunnel or truly just, like a tendonitis, what are the odds that it's bilateral? A lot of times it comes from spine. There's not a lot of room for extra stuff in the spine, I say, as well. So if there's inflammation, irritation, repetition in the posture, not like causing some friction in there, that can irritate, and then you get the symptoms down the arm. The muscles don't work as well. You might feel a little grip weakness. You might feel forearm weakness. You can't open a door. You can't get a jar. So a lot of times just nerves are the problem. And this is, I think, where we are able to figure out this basket so well, is that we can recognize this. We can see, okay, we can't reproduce it from anything that we try through the wrist, through the elbow. Any repetitive motions that we try in the clinic aren't giving you your problem. So if we look back up, we're detectives. We're always trying to figure out where's the problem truly coming from. If someone comes in with carpal tunnel or comes in with tennis, elbow, or tendonitis, I always tell patients I want to treat the whole picture. So if it's something else above contributing to that, that's where we can get that mechanical issue, and that's where posture plays a huge role. If you don't have good posture from the start, and I'm exaggerating, if you're a little forward head like this, and you go to bring your arm up and go to repeatedly serve a ball, or you go repeatedly lift a weight, you're just asking for that area to be irritated and inflamed, which then down the road gets the rest of the arm. I don't know about Steve, I'm sure all our therapists could speak to this, but we get a lot of patients here, but they think they're here and they're not really sure, and so sometimes we don't ever like to go against what the doctors are saying, but I say, we work mechanically from the inside. That's our specialty. That's what we do. We know how the muscles work. We know how the nerve and the nerve pattern go down the arm, go down the hand, make everything work. So that's kind of where we separate ourselves, and we can really figure out getting to the baseline. So if we just work at the wrist or just work at the elbow and the problem's coming from above, then we're not really getting to get you better, and that's where we look for that rapid change, like Steve had mentioned. Sometimes it's that quick. Sometimes we get people who have been, I'm sure some of you are all guilty, beating yourselves up a little longer and say, oh, this will go away, or this will go away, or oh, it's just a little, only when I serve, or only when I, lift my max weight. So, sometimes we get people who just are, and I'm guilty as well, where we go a little longer than we should, and that's where sometimes, the muscles can be a little bit more involved, and once we fix the mechanical problem, then the rest of the body kind of has to heal and has to regroup and strengthen, and that's where we can get people better and be more successful. our goal is to get you, we say this all the time to patients, to not need us. We love having you in the clinic, and we want to see you out here. We want to see you in the gym. We want to see you, doing what you love to do and keeping active and keeping healthy. So if we can really work on that posture, stretch and strengthen, make sure everything's working well here, that can take some of that pressure off the nerve. Think of it like a kink in the garden hose. If something's kinked, it's not allowing good signal. You've got muscle, you have some signal. It's not like you have a dead arm hanging off to the side. But if something is impinged or irritated in the neck, we really have come to find a really good way to work on that, improve upon that, and then get you functioning and get you back into what you like to do.
I just want to add one last thing because we're going to have these guys come up. On that point Aaron made, when you go to the doctor, they take x-rays and an MRI, they're still pictures. You can't really figure out a mechanical problem from a still picture. That's just common sense. And so we tend to get caught in this tissue structural loop of, well, the meds aren't working and it looks like it might be a little arthritis, therefore I'm doomed, I have a structural problem. And more often than not, and I'm going to say 8 out of 10 times, it's a mechanical problem. The only way to know that is to move and to get a good assessment. But to be honest, we tell people, if you don't come to therapy, just move. A lot of good things happen when you move. And so still pictures sometimes gives you only half or 2/3 of the story. And so I just want you to think about that, the importance of moving. With that said, we're going to turn this thing over to the Newell strength guys. These guys are great at building strength, preventing injuries, because when you build strength in tissue, they get injured less. When you move in all directions, you have less mechanical problems. The reason why you run into mechanical problems is you move in the same direction all the time, like Aaron said. Sit in the same chair, move in the same direction. So these guys are really great at it, and I go there. Every time we do a push exercise, we do a pull. Every time we go over our head, we pull down from our head. And so it's so important to have a good strength program before the injury and even after injury, if you do go through therapy or surgery, to have it after. So I might turn this over to Paul. Paul from Newell Strength. Thanks, Paul.
Put this on my keys so I don't lose them.
Exactly. I'm going home to watch the sunlight.
Come on, man. You got to be kidding me. All right. That was pretty good. I'm actually going to live in the mechanical for a little while as well. So if you haven't, I'm going to actually hand these around. If you didn't get one of these when you came in, I don't know if I have enough. I'm going to throw a couple down on each one. You guys can follow along with it. I will not use the whiteboard. There we go. Couple over here.
Thank you.
Couple over here. You got them? Awesome. Me too. Everybody have one? I have one extra. Sorry, man. You got to look over somebody's shoulder. All right, a little background on me really quick. I'm a strength coach at Newell Strength. I'm also the strength and conditioning coach at Hunter and Central Regional High School. I've been there for 11 years. I'm also a licensed athletic trainer. I've been an athletic trainer for 28 years. I've worked with the Somerset Patriots, Sky Blue, some of the best soccer players in the world, and had the opportunity to see a lot of this. This too, but a lot of this. More so in the high school than I ever have in my life over my 11 years. So we're going to talk about a theory, not a theory, but it's almost a mission I go by every day when I talk about working with adults or students, and it's to move well, move strong, move fast, and if you can do those three things, you're going to thrive. Erin said she doesn't want to see you. Well, maybe you won't get a chance to see them if we do all of these things, but in the sequence and order that I put them down on this sheet. So I put a couple things there. Movement's not muscles. Think of the movement of a hinge or a reach like Steve talked about as an assembly line. On one side of the assembly line, guys are taking their breaks every 15 minutes. Not a whole lot of work's getting done. On the other side of the assembly line, they're working like crazy to make sure that the line stays the way it's supposed to. what side's going to break down first? The one that's not doing anything or the one that's really working hard? Which one's going to break down first? The one who's moving a lot, right? The one who's doing it. So think about movements. If one side is way active and the other side is just hanging out, not doing its job like they were talking about with the balance, what side's going to break? How do we get these injuries? How do we see some of the best Olympic athletes who look like specimens all of a sudden blow a hamstring? Holy cow, they were in great shape. Well, maybe they had some dysfunctions. Maybe they had some mechanical issues that were underlying that weren't addressed. So that's what we try to do, and that's what I try to do when I'm working with clients or with our student athletes, is number one, make them move well. So if we look this, I think about it in two ways. Is it a mobility issue or is it a flexibility issue? If we look down there, okay, really good strength coach named Lauren Landau has a quote, and I look at it all the time. Joint angles dictate muscle functions. If I don't have good mobility in my joint, and we'll talk about that in a second, my muscles won't fire the way they should. So now a joint problem of movement creates muscle dysfunction the way they're supposed to work. This started coming to me when actually a long time ago, I listened to a gentleman named Gary Gray. He talked about something called the vertical core versus the horizontal core, and how gravity works on our body when we're standing up much differently when we're laying down. But yet, where do we do most of our quote-unquote core exercises? You see them on the infomercials. We do them laying down, right? We do them on the ground on that bean. Don't buy that bean thing. I'm sorry. Nobody here sells the bean, do they? That inflatable thing? Yeah. Sorry. I'm not going with that. But we do a lot of our stuff laying down. We do planks, everything else, no doubt about it. But what about when we stand up? How do things change? And that's what we try to look at, again, with our clients and our athletes, and address those issues, those movement dysfunctions that's more functional for you, not laying down. All right? So, mobility. Mobility is actually how the joint moves. It could be restricted by a muscle injury. It could be restricted by your tendons and ligaments. If you sprained your ankle a long time ago and it's scarred down, and it's not functioning the way it's supposed to. Heck, if you're a basketball player who had your ankles taped every day for 8 years, 10 years of your career, how's that ankle going to move? It's not going to move too well, is it? So we look at our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments, and the tension that can restrict movement to the joint to make it not work within normal limits. Steve, I'm going to quiz you. How many angles? What's the angles for a shoulder? How many angles does it go through? What's the degrees? I'm sorry, the degrees.
How many degrees?
Yeah.
180 degrees?
180? Does it? I don't know. I was asking. I didn't know the answer. I was just seeing if you did.
You could bring it here. You could bring it here. You could bring it here. Look
Yeah.
at all the different ways you could
Like
run it.
25 degrees.
So we want to make sure it can move within that 180 degrees. I'm banking on that. That 180 degrees the way it's supposed to, like an assembly line. Both sides working together. Front side, back side. No compensations to get all the way through that range of motion. Okay? Flexibility is an individual muscle. A lot of people say, I can't touch my toes. Well, is that a mobility issue or is that a flexibility issue? I don't know. But what I will do if they can't touch their toes is I'll put one foot up on a block and I'll try and have them reach down the one, and I'll put this foot up on a block, and if it's equal, chances are it's a flexibility issue. If it's not equal, could be a mobility issue that I have to address down the line. There's little tricks that we can use to see what it is, mobility versus flexibility. And some of that's just talking to either the client and having a great conversation with you, or talking to the athlete that I'm working with to find out, hey, have you had any previous injuries, things like that. Because what we want to do is we want to keep them back in the game moving well. Okay? So about 13 years ago, a good friend of mine, Rob Rogers, was giving a talk. Actually, I saw him earlier than that. And he was doing something called Neuromuscular Activation Techniques. And I had my book somewhere. Oh, I was holding it. Rob worked with Middle Tennessee State, the Indianapolis Colts. I was going to say Baltimore, showing my age a little bit. And worked on mobility with a lot of their athletes. And he came up with a whole series of planks and isometric holds, some just holds and some with motion, that could restore that balance. As soon as you needed it. So if we're a student athlete and we're sitting all day in a chair, what side is shorter? Front side, right? What side is longer? Back side. Now we get them up and we want them to go out and play a sport right away. Are they balanced? We've got to reestablish that balance a little bit. And sometimes just normal everyday warm-ups won't get that done. I started using neuromuscular activation techniques, and I could tell right now, there were other schools around that laughed at us. And we go out there and then we whoop their ass. Our players were more healthy, they played more, they played better, they played faster, and they moved well, and we thrived. One of them was just touching your toes like we talked about before. Ways to do that. Anybody here have just tight shoulders, no pain, just feel like their shoulders are tight? Raise your hand if you do. Good, you're my victim. Come on over here. Never raise your hand when people ask you, man. You had your hand up at the... So one of the things we talk about with neuromuscular activation techniques goes back to a guy named Gray Cook and the functional movement screen. And he has some screens, and if you've been to Newell Strength and you get screened in as a new client, we use some of those movements and those screens to see how you move. One of them, I'm not sure if we do this one. Do we do the reach, the right reach? So one of the reach tests are to look for internal and external rotation. Stay right here in your shoulder and look to see if there's a difference between the right side and the left side with those. What's your name?
Dan.
Dan, I'm Paul. Nice to meet you,
Nice
Dan.
to meet you.
I just stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I don't know why I'm here. I'm only kidding. Dan, no problems with your shoulders, no pain, anything else like that going on?
It's funny you say that because my left one's better than my right when I do that.
Okay.
That
So
test.
what I want you to do is you're going to turn and face this way.
Okay.
You're going to take your thumbs, tuck them in your palms.
Okay.
And you're going to put your right over the left and your left underneath, and you're going to see if you can scratch your back. So I want you to make a fist, though. Make a fist. Good. Make a fist with this one as well. So I'm going to measure. You make a fist, though. Make a fist. Good. From his knuckle to his knuckle, and it's about 5 inches with his right over top of left. So now I want you to switch and go over top. So, hey, that's a big difference, isn't it? Heck, yeah. So we're talking about almost 9 inches with that. So face everybody for me. So one of the techniques that Rob uses or showed us was, yes, some lower extremity, but he also showed us a great upper extremity mobility enhancer. And it's pretty simple. But again, some teams laughed at us when we did those things. So here's what he's going to do. He's going to take his fingers and he's going to clench them together. Okay. And he's going to try and pull them apart right here. So we talked about range of motion in the shoulder. We're going to work through some ranges of motion. So as you're pulling, I just want you to move your shoulders up and down for me. Right there. We're going to do 5 to 8 of them. And we're going to go side to side. We're just going to shift it side to side. You got it. And we're going to make a circle like we're stirring a pot. Still pulling against those hands, trying to break those fingers apart. And we're going to go the other way. He's going to tell you right now, he's starting to sweat a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I wasn't expecting to.
And relax. Okay, so relax for a second. Now we're going to take your hands. Kyle's a big jiu-jitsu guy, so we're going to go jiu-jitsu right here. I'm not sure if you do that. Okay.
I do taekwondo. So.
Do you? All right. So now we're going to make that fist. Now we're going to push them together instead of pulling them apart. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to move up and down. And we're going to go side to side. We're going to make big circles clockwise. And big circles counterclockwise. Now, if Dan has a mobility problem, and I just created balance in his shoulders, we should see a difference in that without stretching anything else. So I want you to put your thumbs together. Which one was the worst one?
The right.
Let's go.
This one was okay.
Yeah. That was 5. We're down to 4 there. Go the other way. Keep going, keep going. Good. We're down to 7 on that side. So we increased 2 inches on his rotation from both shoulders without even stretching them yet, by just creating more balance from front to back. Now, if I see you in ShopRite, you better be able to touch your hands back together, or we're going to do this right in the middle of the produce.
I'll be working on it every day.
I tell the kids that all the time.
Produce.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Thanks for being my victim. You can clap for him. He did a good job. I did nothing. But Rob had a whole lot of these that he worked with the Colts and Middle Tennessee, and he saw huge gains in their mobility just by spending a few minutes doing some of these motions. So he wrote a book about it. And I can tell you right now, I still give out this book. Alyssa will tell you I gave out this book to everybody at Newell. Did I give this? I gave this to everybody just about. Oh, you weren't there yet. Sorry.
I already looked it up.
I'll get you. No, he doesn't sell it anymore. I got the only copy. I get them made for free at school. Shh. Okay? No taxpayer money involved on that, by the way. Okay? So, if we take that NAT and we incorporate that into what we do every day, and by the way, the first thing we do at Hunter and Central, we do some type of plank or we do some type of hip mobility with NAT to make sure that we get that balance before we start to move. Okay? So we want to establish great movement patterns, our hinge, our squat, our upper push and pull. Okay? Those are the things that we really want to work on. And it goes back to when we were babies. Right? When we were babies. When a baby stands up, does it walk right away? Nah, what does it do? He or she. Boom. Squats right down, right? Learns how to control its collapse and goes into a picture-perfect squat. That's what, at like 1? I can't remember. I had my son and daughter are so old. But at 1, I got 15-year-olds right now, so 14 years, they can't squat. They can't keep their heels down, they can't sit back. Do we need to move better before we put a load on their back? Before we do anything else? Yes, we do. So that's number 1. So we got to get everybody moving really well. So there's a couple things we can do. We can just do a 3-point hinge. So if we talk about it, and this is outside of upper extremity, but we can work on a hinge with a dowel and just think about pointing back and coming back up again. That's our hinge pattern. Our squat pattern we talked about, we don't need a dowel. I do the I Dream a Genie. Again, dating myself, putting my hands here, elbows stay up, and I squat with my elbows up. With that, I also do trunk stability push-ups. So if I want to see how well, and doing a push-up, everybody's like, oh, my right arm dies. Has nothing to do with arms. It does, but it doesn't. It's a core activity as well. So if I push myself up, remember, vertical versus horizontal core, I want to make sure this part of my body stays neutral with my knees and my shoulders. So if it does this, like that, when I do a push-up, what do you think it's going to do when I'm standing up? When gravity's pulling down? Boom. I'm not going to go into Steve's back talk, but why do we get a lot of extension injuries with a lot of our kids? Well, that's why. Then they start shooting and shooting and shooting, and they start closing down one side over and over and over again. And next thing they know, they're in their office with a fracture in their back or some type of other injury. Starts with poor movement. So we look at a trunk stability push-up. Last one we look at is I'm not going to get on the floor. I'm not sure if Steve washed the floor here, but on our bellies, we're going to be here. We're going to tuck. We're going to have our palms up and our palms like this, our hands up. And if you guys go to Newell, you know we do these Ys and Ws coming down. So Steve talked about the scapular rotation. Well, there's my scapular upward rotation there. It's got to sit on my ribs and come up. And as I bring it down, I want to use my lats because they're involved in shoulder stabilization as well as I pull down and get all of that motion just the way we need it. So that's our move well. It's got to happen first. Then we can get on to move strong. Then we can start to actually add some weight. Now we can start to add some volume. Weight is intensity, I put it there. Volume versus intensity, okay? Volume is how much you do, intensity is how hard it is. That's it. So, I'm a volume first guy, especially somebody coming back. If they've come back from an injury or they don't move well, I want to get that movement pattern and I want to do it a lot. I want to do it a lot. I want to add volume. I may not have to add a lot of weight, but I want to add volume. There's a great program called 1x20 for freshmen that come in to my weight room. Basically, it's 20 reps of 15 different exercises, and we do those every single day. to groove those patterns. So I want to add volume first, and then as I add volume and get better and better and better at those movement patterns and those exercises, now I can add exercises inside those patterns. Because again, I talked about a push. What's a push we do at Newell? Bench, dumbbell bench, military press, half kneel military press. Those are exercises within that pattern. That's not the pattern, those are exercises. Okay? So I can add volume. Then I add intensity. How do I add intensity? Is weight the only way? You should say no, because it says a lot of things on here if you have the sheet of paper. Weight is not the only way we could add intensity. We can change the surface we're standing on. We can change and go from unilateral to bilateral. Unilateral single leg, bilateral double leg. Unilateral single arm, bilateral double arm. That'll change the intensity because now we got to stabilize a little bit more all the way down the chain. Okay? We can change the speed of movement. That's absolutely a way to change the intensity. But we don't want to do that too fast because you can see what's coming up, the move fast. Okay? So now that we've developed strength, balance, we're moving well, now we can actually get back to the speed that we want to. But Steve and I were talking about this the other night. As soon as we get back, what do we want to do? And I get this all the time. Kid comes running in. I'm cleared. Yet they haven't done anything up to that point other than see the doctor, and the doctor says, hey, your x-ray is good. They haven't run, they haven't moved well, they haven't moved strong, they haven't moved fast, they haven't done all these things. And then I got the dad, hey, they got a showcase in 2 weeks, they got to be better. Oh, what are we going to do? They can't even move well right now. We got to get them moving fast, and they got to get a showcase where they have to be at their best. Does that make sense? It doesn't. So going in this order is crucial to make sure that we can maintain our movement pattern, we can get our strength where we need it, and then we can get the speed of movement with great movements where we need to go back and swing a tennis racket, cut side to side, do whatever we need to with our shoulders, our elbows, and our wrists. Last thing is thrive. You do all these things, you feel good all day, what can you do? You can enjoy life. I have it right there. You can enjoy life. I tell our kids all the time when they talk to me about, oh, I heard, or this, that's going on, and we back down a little bit. But no, I can do it. I said, I'm not talking about right now. I'm not talking about these next 4 years. I'm talking about when you're 53 like me, and you can go out and walk around with your kids and throw the ball around and do those things, and do it comfortably. That's what I'm talking about. Because if we do some early onset things that can create some damage or they have to have intervention done earlier in their life, that's not such a good thing. So I look out for that. And kids are resilient, don't get me wrong. But I just want to make sure that as they finish with me, and you guys are resilient. But every day I come in, I want to make sure that you have the best possible outcome for that day. Movement, strength, and speed. That's it. That's my goal every single day when you walk in the door. Last one is live with passion. Everything you do, you should be passionate about it. That's just a warm-up. BS. That's moving better. Don't just go through it. Have passion through it. Get better. Work better. Move better. That's what we're trying to do. Does that make sense for everybody? The guy who taught me all of this, last story, name is Gary Schofield. Gary Schofield is a character. He's one of the founders of our High School Strength Coaches Association. And as he's telling me about this, he's also telling me a story about his movement problems. His upbringing was just like mine. He was an athletic trainer. He started with the Atlanta Hawks, and he started working with WWE. And when he was ringside one day, he was working with, I don't know who the match was, and they had a sign when they needed him to go into the ring, when they were really hurt, and I forgot what it was. But is it Eric Nash, or who's the Nash guy? Who's the wrestler? Nash. Kevin Nash. Hey, there we go. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Kevin Nash. He's the power bomb guy. He didn't invent it, but so Kevin Nash is waiting in the wings, and I guess earlier in that day, Kevin Nash said something to Gary, and Gary said, shut up, I'm good. You know, he said something to him. So now Kevin Nash is waiting on the outside. The guy in the ring does something. Gary jumps in, and he's telling me this, and again, he's talking to me about this too. Kevin Nash comes running out, unscripted, picks up Gary Schofield, the athletic trainer, and he showed me a video of it too, by the way. He has a video, and power bombs him on Wednesday Night Raw. He said he couldn't move his shoulders, his neck for about 2 weeks after that power bomb. So that's my story about upper extremity with Gary, learning about this stuff. I thought it was pretty funny how, as an athletic trainer or a strength coach, we can get into the mix a little bit and get messed up too. All right? And it's up to us to fix ourselves, hopefully, or go to these guys. You can see me afterwards, ask me any questions, because I'm going to leave the floor for Kyle. I went way over my time, but thank you very much.
All right, does everybody have 2 rubber bands? Just do me a favor.
Thank you.
Take 2. Who else doesn't have them? Anybody else need them?
We just need 2.
2. There should be plenty to pass around. Okay. All right, first thing we're going to do, guys, we just put the mic on. What you're going to do first, 2 reasons for this. You're going to double up those rubber bands. So you're going to have 2 on one hand. So I'm using something called it's kind of very similar, but you can use this rubber bands. Put it around your fingers like this. We're going to do both hands. So you're going to start with one hand. I want you to extend. You're working the extenders here 25 times. And then we're going to switch hands. Did you get rubber bands? Yeah. Hold on. You got extra? Thanks. Oh, good. That way you'll feel. 1 rubber band's probably not strong enough on this, guys. Get 25 and then switch sides. Feel that? If you've never done that before, you should be feeling a little burning. A couple of reasons I'm having you do that. First thing, the thing on your body that is most tied in with your brain and nervous system is your hands. Feet are right there with them. So your hands. You can work both sides of the brain. You can actually grow something called the corpus callosum that connects both hemispheres by using both hands doing stuff. Second reason I had you do that, we've had a lot of guys at the gym, a lot of people at the gym throughout the years, more so guys with tennis elbow, different types of pain within the tendons. And every time I can't say every time, but let's say 95% of the time, we introduce grip training, working the extenders, working some flexion, we see it improve over time. I've noticed that with myself too. So when I'm driving around, I keep this in the car, okay, a crusher, and I keep that red band just like you guys have with the rubber bands, and I do this. I do one hand, then I switch hands. So it's great for my brain, great for working a lot of these muscles that you're not working all the time. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So a quick little backstory about me. 2012, 2014, I had identical injuries, opposite knees. According to my surgeon, worst knee injuries he's ever seen. And he's done thousands of surgeries on that. Patellar tendon snapped into 4 pieces, 3 ligaments in each leg, and the IT band. So, basketball both times. Basketball.
Went down.
Oh yeah, it was bad. Yeah. So first time around, I learned a lot. I actually wrote a book about it, helped people all over the world recover from that injury. Throughout that process, I was able to learn a lot of unconventional ways of how you can recover from different injuries. In 2019, I had a torn Tommy John ligament, which Paul helped me with, supraspinatus, and labrum in my shoulder. Was able to avoid surgery with both of those. One of the things that I found to be very true with all those injuries is even when you're injured, you have to move, like Paul said, like Steve said, you got to move. You have to constantly move to heal. Now that doesn't mean you should be training the part that's injured. So when you get injured, the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, what I've seen, I just had a basketball coach call me on the way here, same thing, he's talking about one of his athletes, is not move at all. You need your muscles are like a big pump. You need movement to pump blood throughout the body. Getting blood to injured sites, first of all, is going to help get nutrients in there. It's going to help clear waste. So you got to move. So if you have a broken arm, you train the good side and you train your lower body. So that's first. Second thing, when you get injured, probably everybody in here, I'm guessing, has been injured at some point. It's depressing when you can't do what you want to do. And that can spiral really bad, out of control. If you can't play tennis, if you can't hit the gym, if you can't play basketball, whatever it is that you like to do. There are certain growth factors that can only get to your brain through physical movement. It's a survival mechanism that can only cross the blood-brain barrier when you move. So moving when you're injured, training all the good parts of your body is going to help you a lot. If your mindset's better, it's going to lead you to do more things to help you heal. And your body also has something called it's like a crossover effect. If my shoulder on this side, so when I had the elbow injury on this side, the shoulder was first. So I went over a year where I didn't press with this side of my body, but I pressed with this side of my body. People say, aren't you going to get uneven? You don't get uneven. It has a crossover effect. You're not going to get as much muscle loss on the other side. You're going to keep some of the strength on that side. So you can train the good side, right? And you train, the lower body, whatever it is. So I couldn't press with this side. Probably about 6 months into that journey, playing basketball again, tore this ligament. And we were about to have our daughter like 2 weeks later. I couldn't even move my arm. It was bad. Paul set me up with one of his buddies, did scans, we saw the tears. So now I couldn't, on this side, row. Okay, I couldn't press on this side, but I still made it work. There's stuff you can do. You can move, you can pick up weights, you can walk. You could do, that's where having somebody good to turn to, a great athletic trainer, physical therapist, strength coach, is really key. So that's one of the takeaways I want you to take from what I'm telling you guys. Second thing, which might seem like it has nothing to do with injuries, upper body injuries. The guy I talked to from Canada today is recovering from a patellar tendon rupture. He's 15 days out from his surgery. And when I wrote the first book on that, I put a lot of nutrition stuff in there, big nutrition background. Since that time, one of the main things I teach people when I study is fasting. So he said, what do you recommend with this? And I said, listen, if I knew now what I knew then, and I did know that with the second time, I said I would use fasting to help me heal quicker. If you look at any animal, when they're sick, okay, so start with when they're sick. Did they eat or not? No, they let the body heal. Right? You have all these different parts of the nervous system where if you're constantly eating, right, a lot of blood is going to the gut. Most of your neurotransmitters are in your gut. We want to give that a break. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to allow the body to heal. Same thing when you're sick or when you're injured. Fasting is going to help you get weight off, if that's a concern for you. You could get injuries because you can't move because maybe you're too heavy to move, right? Or maybe it's a lower body injury, whatever it is. But fasting is going to reduce inflammation. So when you fast, you're controlling something called insulin. Insulin, if you're eating too often, you get insulin resistance. Most people have that in this country. Insulin resistance is the root of every disease. Insulin resistance and inflammation are very, very closely tied together. So when we fast, we know that we get more insulin sensitive, the opposite, and inflammation goes down. So that's kind of something that you can use that is outside the box towards your healing process. So when you fast, anybody have experience with fasting here? I know the people from the gym do. Okay, so fasting is you're abstaining from any calories basically. To get a real like healing effect, you got to be going like to the 24-hour mark, like 1 meal a day. So what's popular is you'll get a 16-hour fast.
You gradually work to that, am I right? You don't just jump into it.
So let me go over the fasting protocol I recommend for you guys then.
Excuse me, could you speak up again? As soon as you turn that way.
Okay.
I can't hear over here.
Okay, you got it. So fasting is something you wanted to try. I would say you jump right into it. Meaning you don't build up from the bottom. Don't start with 12 hours, 14 hours. Jump into a longer fast. Try 1 meal a day. Try going 36 hours. Because now you knock out any of the unknowns or the fear or the lack of confidence you have with fasting. much better approach. When I used to try to people, okay, let's do 16 hours.
Go to 12 to 15 to
Yeah,
17.
don't do it. Start right from the top.
And then,
Yes, start right from the top. So when people go through our fasting program, they start with a 48-hour fast. And then we go to 1 meal a day. And then they explore, they do longer fasts. But fasting is the probably one of the number one things, the beautiful things about the human body that you can do to heal. Right? The ancient wisdom, almost every religion has known this. But in the past 100, 150 years or so, it's become much less popular for various reasons. So with that being said, I know it's already 9 o'clock, 9:04. The other guys are going to come up. You guys can ask any questions you want about any of the things they talked about, any upper body injuries, any surgery recommendations. Maybe they could talk about PRP therapy, whatever you guys want, okay? So come on up, guys. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Anybody have any questions? Any upper body injuries, anything that we touched on?
So tennis elbow is like this side, right? Like it's like the aberrant. What do you guys see like when someone's got pain like on the elbow? Like I've had that kind of off and on for the last 18 months. I worked through it, but I can't seem to like shake it completely.
So tennis elbows on the outside, they call the inside golfer's elbow. All right. So the muscles that close your hand and flex your wrist attach to the bone on the inside. And the muscles that open your hand and extend your wrist attach to the muscles on the outside. The difference between the golfer's elbow and tennis elbow is tennis elbow, remember, there's two bones here. The one little bone that runs up the side is that joint that I say very often if you see mechanical problems, tennis elbow. Golfer's elbow we tend to see more of number two, just a straight up tissue injury. You know, you grip things, you swing a racket or a golf club, you actually injure the tendon. And so, like Kyle mentioned, you might use anti-inflammatory grip strengthening and that will eventually help. It does take time to get inside. It's a bummer.
Yeah.
The lateral, the cool part about the lateral is if it is a mechanical problem, we can get people better really fast. It's really good. So Steve Borg says this tennis elbows all the time, and a lot of times in like 6 months they got like straps and braces and stuck with needles, and we do a couple things and like 5 visits. They're like, this is unbelievable. How did you fix it? They were treating it like this, and we treated it like this.
Yeah.
Just goes back. Unfortunately, needles not always done.
But it's worth the work.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
without taking an X-ray or an MRI, would you be able to determine from the mechanical if someone says, I'm having a problem with my shoulder, I don't know if it's a rotating problem, I don't know if it's my shoulder.
Yeah.
By you doing an examination without an X-ray or an MRI, would you be able to determine what the problem might be?
So the answer to your question is yes, more often than not. Now, here's the thing. An X-ray and MRI only shows structure. It's a still picture that only shows the integrity of the structure. So someone comes in without an X-ray, if we could make them go from an 8 out of 10 pain to a 2 out of 10 by the time they leave, we're feeling pretty good about it. They don't need any X-rays, don't need anything. If we start to examine them and we can't figure it out, then we say, you know what, we better get a film to rule this out. So if we get confused, we go, well, we got to rule this out because we're not getting there. Otherwise, more often than not, 2 out of the 3 times, we see the tissue mechanic, we can figure that out in the clinic. If we're not getting anywhere, we go, maybe we should get an X-ray and MRI. That's how it works.
Yeah, and piggyback off that, just through the evaluation itself, we can get a good idea of if something red flags, something doesn't sound right, something's not moving right. Like, we know the mechanical very well, so when something's not falling into that, we're like, well, maybe we need a little better look. Or if there's like fall trauma, sometimes we like to say, hey, let's get that investigated first to make sure then we can kind of clear and do what we do.
You don't have to run and get the films. Like, it's expensive, and good therapists can sort some of it out. A lot of our patients will come to see us first, and we go, no, we got this.
To determine.
Yeah, we got this. We know what this is. And then other times we'll look and say, you know what, let's just go get that X-ray because we're not comfortable. So that's what we do. Yeah.
I kind of want to give props to somebody that's here, my therapist.
Who's that?
I went to Alyssa from ProCare in
Alyssa.
Burlington. Yeah. Glad she helped my husband, but I went to my doctor. I had a stiff neck, and in a matter of a short time, my arm, the pain in my arm was incredibly severe. And then my fingers started to go numb. I went to the doctor, I was scared, and he said he's the one that pointed me to go and try physical therapy. And through going to Melissa and doing her manipulation in my neck. Yeah, through my neck. I mean, and through just the traction, it was amazing. I mean, I have no problems really with my fingers right now. And even when she did the traction, I could actually feel it all the way down my arm. I feel much better.
But so back to that whole thing, it's like you had a mechanical problem, she was able to make rapid, immediate change.
Yes.
And she was able to fix that.
Well, it took,
It takes time.
yeah, it
Yeah,
took,
of course.
because
It's fixable.
nerve
Mechanical
irritating.
problems are fixable. You got a structural problem that could be,
Yeah.
it would not be corrected. And by the way, when you deal with that nerve pain, tissue's not even in the equation. I mean, that tissue's a localized strain. Yeah, so that's, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, this is probably more of a Kyle Paul question, but if you're training for an event, do you recommend, I guess it might depend upon the event or the sport, but do you recommend more intense training with breaks, or do you recommend more of a constant? Because I've heard this caveman theory where back in the day as humans, it was always this sudden, chase to kill the animal, but the way we work out today is more like longer term versus the short intensity. I'm wondering if you should mix it up depending upon the sport, or what do you think?
First of all, I'd ask what you're doing.
I'm training for my second triathlon. It's a sprint.
So there's gonna be a lot.
Yeah, but typically the coaches will recommend is the sort of biking, swimming, running, but I want to build my endurance now, so I'm thinking, should it be more intense now, or should it be less?
How far out are you?
Excuse me?
How far out are you?
July.
I'm bad at math. 3 months?
Yeah.
3 months?
But I've been
That's
training
what we
since
got. That's what we
January.
got, yeah. I would say you gotta start getting more into getting closer to your distances and what you need to do. Well, my biggest thing is, when does growth happen? Does it happen when you're actually doing the exercises, or when you're recovering from the exercises? So if you wanted to get stronger and faster and everything else, for the next great workout, you have to think about recovery too. So if you're always beating your body up and we're creating movement changes, then I would think that you gotta do a little bit more of an undulating periodization going into that, instead of going completely up here going into there. So hard day, soft day. And I think most of the workouts you'll see will offer that, some type of undulating workout, where you'll do a shorter day with a little bit more intensity, and then a longer day with a little bit less intensity, and you use your heart rate monitor and things like that, and to look at those things. But again, knowing that if you're on a bike for a long ride, again, thinking about being front side dominant, now you've got to run a little bit more, and you've got to run and sprint, which is going to be a little more backside dominant. We got to keep that balance in mind.
What I liked about it, because I've been going to ProCare since I got injured before the triathlon, between Alyssa, Brian, and Eric, they have done triathlons, like the Ironman or the biathlons. They were able to gear me getting healed quicker and training earlier and harder by combining, what you're saying with the healing processes.
Absolutely.
They work hand in hand.
And it's not hard. I mean, Steve talks about getting somebody better within a workout. You saw me change him by 2-3 inches, and that's only temporary. Dan's got to do his work, and again, he's got to do some things to make sure that he maintains and gets better and better. Because to me, 7 still isn't good enough. He's got to do better than that from one side.
To jump in real quick, not to drag this out, but I think what Paul's saying is, if you're 3 months out of the triathlon, you gotta do a triathlon, it's a training schedule. But on your off season, if there is one, if you have time off, you go to like a Newell, and you're doing that full body, ballistic, HIIT exercises, strength training, power to weight ratio stuff, things to get you stronger faster. So when you are 3 months out of the tri, you get on that bike, you're optimal. And so there's an off season, I think more the explosive strength training, but then it's time to train for the race. So that's what Paul's talking about. So you should call these guys, because if you one a year, you spend 9 months in the weight room, and then 3 months training for the race.
Yeah.
You'll do that, I guarantee it.
One thing I would add to that too is strength leads to endurance.
Excuse me?
Strength leads to endurance.
Yeah.
The stronger you get, the less energy you're going to expend. So rather than hitting spiking every day or whatnot, it definitely still makes sense strength training the whole time because you're going to expend a lot less energy. And the most injured athletes, these guys will tell you, are endurance athletes. There's a reason because most of them don't strength train.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I have a different type of question. I've had 2 reverse shoulder replacements and have limitations on the weights that I can use and certain things I can use. Where do I get the information on how to modify even some of the things
Yeah.
that's in, that's been very difficult. I've talked to trainers and it's like,
So are
I
you-
would say they don't have a clue.
Are you done with your rehab for your shoulder
Oh, yeah.
replacements? But you
I'm
just
done.
want to exercise now?
Oh, I'm playing tennis full time
Yeah.
and cycling and doing everything else.
Yeah.
Steve will tell you the changes that have occurred, and I'm now 4 years from my wife's shoulder. And
Yeah,
I
you know-
need to build a lot of strength
Yeah.
here,
Sure.
but we have limitations on this, amount of weight we can work on rotating that shoulder. So it doesn't
You
come
really
apart.
should have like physical therapy, like just a couple visits to so they can teach you what to do on your own. But the unique part about a reverse shoulder is that you don't have rotator cuff strength.
That's
Therefore,
right,
you
there's
need
no
the strength
rotator
in-
cuff
You
left
have
at
no
all.
rotator cuff, so you need the strength in your deltoids and all these other things. So you have to do
But
that properly.
finding physical therapists, yeah, I can do, but then when those visits are done, they're done.
Yeah.
But
But
to
it-
then to try and find
Yeah.
a trainer or reference materials and say, okay, here's how you strengthen it when you have these limitations
Yeah.
placed on you.
Yeah.
There's an
You-
increased
yeah.
reps.
Yeah,
there's
your
how-
situation.
How to put that program
Sure.
together
Yeah.
so that I can rebuild. 10 years ago, I should have had a reverse shoulder done, and it was
Yeah.
underdiagnosed.
But you have a unique situation.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
what I
it's
mean. I have a very unusual
detailed, and you
situation.
really need to make sure you talk to people that know what they're doing.
Well, where do I find them?
It's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm just
See,
kidding.
the
I'll tell you right
problem
now,
is,
like-
where do you find them, and where do you find them that you trust, that they know
Yeah,
what
no,
they're
I
doing?
mean, I can tell you right now, Brian back there, he's been treating athletes, tennis players of all ages for 30 years. I go see him.
And you know, I'm pre-Title IX, so I did a lot of athletics with no trainers,
Yeah,
coaches who didn't know what they were doing,
yeah, sure.
and physicians who said, why are you doing that? Stop jumping, stop doing this. And I sort of said,
We'll talk to that guy back there.
rolled my eyes and left and went back and did it, and worked things sort of
Yeah.
trial and error.
You're a unique situation, it's a tough situation, but we have people that can help you.
I
Yeah,
have a nutrition question. You talked about doing the fasting and how that will help reduce the inflammation and stuff if you're recovering from an injury. But what about protein? Is it important to have a lot of extra protein when you're recovering from an injury or trying to gain strength?
No, protein is more anabolic, it's gonna help you build up more, but it leads to more inflammation in the body. Animal protein will actually lead to more insulin resistance. A lot of studies that show that versus stuff that grew around.
But what about if you're a vegetarian and you want to have protein, not animal protein?
The myth that you can't get protein from plants is completely false.
Correct.
Okay, so you don't need nearly as much from a guy my size. I can tell you just from personal experience, it would take about 400 grams a day when I was a bodybuilder. Now, I might have animal protein 3 times a week. Okay, so maybe not even 100 grams a week, sometimes I do. So, do you need it? No, you don't need it at all. But it's gonna lead to anything that leads to more inflammation in your body. Okay, so it's an amino acid, it makes your body more acidic. It's gonna delay the healing, but again, it is more anabolic. If you want to put on more muscle, then you want to increase
Kyle's a big fasting guy, as you can tell. And the one thing he preaches at the gym is, we need food to live, to survive. But it's amazing how food is detriment sometimes.
Food's a drug.
I have a question. So I coach 3 youth softball teams, and going back to Paul, what you were talking about with the warm-ups, I'm not happy with what has been done in the past. Traditionally, you do some jumping jacks, jog a little bit, and then right into throwing. So my little ones, I'm the head coach with them, and I've been doing more of like a dynamic style warm-up. The older ones, now we have injuries that have just come up, and I think some of it is the result of poor warm-ups. Where would I go to look for a better warm-up?
You can call us, I'll work one up from you, I'll talk about your team, we'll put something together that's appropriate for the age group that you have. It's pretty simple.
Okay.
And the big thing though is it has to be coached.
Right.
So when you're doing it, you have to be coaching them. So even at our level, I can see our teams warming up on their own, no coaches, the coaches are in the corner, and it's just haphazard going on. So it's got to be coached, the kids have to be watched, it's got to be a little bit of fun too.
Right.
And yeah, we can work with you with that. Just give us a call.
We'll be happy to have Coach Paul or somebody come out and do that, so you can see that.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic again, because I'm seeing my older girls who, again, I'm just an assistant coach with them, but I'm seeing them, they again, the warm-ups are haphazard, and now we're starting to see injuries come about, and again, I think it's because of a poor warm-up.
Yeah, definitely. Number 2.
Yeah.
Number 2 injuries.
Thanks, Tom.
Any questions you guys got?
So both my knees are hurting. I know this is about the upper body, but hurt is where it is. From what you said, is it fair to say just come to you first and not bother with x-rays and all those things?
Yeah, we can take a look at it. Legally, you're allowed to go right to physical therapy. You don't need the doctor.
There was no-
Yeah, and we're not gonna take any great chances. We'll do a physical examination. I think that's kind of lost now in medicine. Everything is a conversation and picture. And then, not to go too negative, but, it's a conversation and picture. You gotta move. You can't figure this out if you don't move. That makes sense.
Are there maintenance techniques for a mechanical issue arising from a ganglionic cyst in the wrist?
Most mechanical issues are from too much in one direction, not enough in another. Like the door hinge. Were you here for that? Door hinge analogy? So, I know this sounds crazy, but some of the exercises we tell people doing their shoulder are behind the back stretches and wrist, shoulder extension stretches. And the reason why is we spend most of our day doing this and doing this. I know that sounds ridiculous. It's too simple, but it really is that simple. So usually whatever, with spine, the majority of mechanical problems arise from too much flexion. We tell people to do the walk extension. Same with the shoulder and yada, yada, yada. So it's actually really simple. You just want balance. You want full range of motion in all directions. A healthy joint should move in all directions, fully without pain. And so if you test the joint out, any joint in your body, you have limitation in that direction, well, go get that direction. And that's the answer. So it's not specific to like assist. It's just good health of a joint. The health of the joint should move in all directions, pain-free.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You can answer or not answer it because it's advertised on the radio all the time. I really don't know what it is, but it's the Trinity Rehab and the EPAP machine, the vertical machine. What is it? Do you subscribe to it?
I gotta tell you, I've been doing this for 25 years. There is no gadget. There is no gadget for any time. That's all I'll say about it.
Yeah.
We don't have any gadget. No. We have any, we have rubber bands, and weights, and a table, and therapists. That's it. Maybe a ball and a rubber band.
But one gadget, you worked on my face.
Well, that's a special thing.
Okay, that was a specialty, but it was very hard to find a person like yourself that had that machine that helped me.
He had Bell's palsy and there's a special device for that, but that's not a gadget, that's the real deal.
I have a question about ankles. So you know the old tale that sometimes doctors say, hey, it's better to break your ankle than sprain it because the sprain keeps coming back and coming back. So what do you say to an ankle that sprains, say, 4 times in 2 years? I have someone in my life that has that problem. So I'm trying to figure out the right approach, physical therapy, going to you, maybe a question for Paul as well, because I don't think that, is that, what's that? No, it's not me.
So,
but is that a mechanical problem at this point?
So it's interesting. Like ligaments hold joints, hold bones together. Ligaments hold joints together. Tendons and muscles work together. But so when you sprain your ankle that many times, the thought is the ligament got stretched, and so now the joint is kind of loose, right? I mean, if you think about it, the ligament is a nice tight strap that holds the joint together. If it's sprained so many times that it stretches out, your joint is loose. You need to figure out a way to get the ligament stronger, tighter, but also if the person's still in pain, it's a problem because now you have a mechanical problem, right? You don't have that stability there, right? So it's a twofold thing. It's a strength thing and it's also a mechanical thing at the same time. So the therapist can figure out how to strengthen it while maintaining mechanical support. It's tricky. We do a lot of taping techniques. We exercise. Taping techniques, exercise. Sometimes we'll teach a spouse to tape the person for you. So it's tricky, but we see a lot of that.
To kind of jump off that, we will be able to look at your mechanics. Like maybe you just don't move in a certain way that maybe we can say, hey, you're toe in, toe out, imbalance, all going back to balance and your strength training and just look at the mechanics of what maybe is causing it rather than, your symptoms are, you're rolling your ankle, you're weak. But if there's something that we can work on from the bottom up, yeah.
I would say this. If it's not pain, if there's no pain and it hasn't been an acute episode in like 9 months, it just feels unstable, and then I would say go work out at the gym, go to Newell, let these guys work. If the thing is still giving out, a lot of pain, you walk down the hallway, boom, and like, then you got to therapy.
Because using myself as an example, because it's not me, I used to sprain mine once every couple of years, and I've noticed, I don't think I've sprained it in 7 years. Because I move more. Because I'm working out more, and it's like, coming here and stuff.
The one thing the human body does is responds to stress. So when you stress it, it grows, it strengthens. It's everything. Right? If I took a 5-pound weight and laid it on my arm for like a year, and then a year, but okay, get this thing off my arm, you'd see like a big mound of tissue under that weight. The stress will make things grow.
Don't give Kyle any ideas.
So that's the thing. So moving is good. Moving strengthens tissue. Moving helps mechanical flaws. Stress strengthens things. That's how bone spurs grow. When you have a mechanical flaw that never got addressed, now you're not working properly. Now you have an abnormal stress, and now a bone starts to grow, and now you're like, now I got a problem. Now I have a structural problem. Does that make sense?
When you
say something on that too. That's a quick one that gave this to this.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you have an unstable joint, that even though it doesn't hurt, that joint remains unstable. You can go again from this to this. So I would tell your friend to go see them right away. So we're
probably a therapy thing. But long term, if it's chronic and it's not that painful, you could, like you work through it. It could be.
So you talk a lot about taping. When you tape, doesn't it take away from strengthening that particular joint, or say an ankle, or say, I mean, don't, you know what I'm saying? You're relying on the tape or brace too much.
Yeah, you don't want to brace too much. The hardest part about being a physical therapist is you got to move people that are in pain. Right? How do you strengthen a tissue that's torn? Right? You can't just give it a 50-pound dumbbell and tear it more. Right? You have to figure out ways to move them and strengthen them with less pain. There are taping tricks to do that. The taping isn't like a boxer, but we're taping the ankles and we're restricting people. It's not that type of thing. You see these
side.
Yeah.
It's something you need in the short term
Yeah, you
to allow
wear it
that
and
motion.
you see gymnasts, right? They have all this like crazy web tape on them and stuff like that. That's one type. Kinesio tape, that's one type of tape. We don't do a ton of that. That's a little gimmicky. We do some of that. There's other styles of taping that help facilitate. You can move, but yet stabilize. That's what we always want to move. We don't want to restrict movement. Braces are a bad idea, generally speaking.
Well, we have the same thing with horses, that's why we're both relating to that.
Yeah.
It's like, if you keep wrapping,
Immobilizing them.
yeah,
Not
don't let
Yeah,
them
you don't
move,
wanna
yeah,
immobilize them.
then they never,
Yeah, every time someone walks in our office with a boot on, we're just like, oh, you know what I mean? That's the physical therapist mindset. Now, they may need a, not to kill them.
there's a place for everything.
There's a place for everything. Unfortunately, sometimes someone has this and they're wearing a boot, and you're like, all it's doing is making the tissue weaker and stiffer. No, you don't move something, it's weak and stiff. These three categories are the key to orthopedic injury. You gotta figure out which one you have, and sometimes it's a combo. It gets tricky. It's tricky. You know, that's why we exist. We figure this stuff out. And the key is just keep moving. You don't have a structural problem, major structural problem, like unstable bone, a broken bone. You can move. 1978, my dad threw his back up. He said, lay in bed. He was in bed for like 3 weeks. Every time we get out of bed, it hurts. If it hurts, don't get out of bed. I mean, the guy was in bed for 3 weeks, 1978. I had like a pacifier now. What's with my back? Like, you've been in bed for nowadays, you'd be like, get out of bed. It hurts. Get out of the damn bed. You know, that's just the way it is now. You gotta move.
They make you want a thing.
Yeah.
I had a spinal fusion. I was back riding horses within 6 months. So, but they got me help.
Anyone else? All right, everyone, thanks for coming out.
Guys, last thing, in May, we're doing a lower body joint seminar. Keep an eye out for that. If you want, at Newell Strength with us, if you want a pre-evaluation, free session, just fill out one of these cards. We'll be in touch with you, absolutely free. If you want a copy of the Panda Diet books, and all the stuff we talked about fasting, just put your address in the bottom and I'll mail that out to you. All right, thanks for coming out, guys.
Yeah, we got some flyers too.
Good.